Hello, friends. Today we are going to talk about a very special person who lived a long time ago. His name was Aristotle, and he was one of the smartest people in history. He was so curious about the world around him, and his ideas changed how people think about life, science, and even how we talk to each other. If you're learning English or just curious about history, this story is for you. I'm going to explain everything in very simple words, with lots of details and feelings, so you can really feel connected to Aristotle's life and work. Let's begin. Imagine you are living in a small town called Stagira in Greece over 2,000 years ago. This is where Aristotle was born, in the year 384 BCE. Can you picture it? A quiet, peaceful place surrounded by green hills and blue skies. Aristotle's father, Nicomachus, was a doctor. He worked for the king of Macedonia, which was a nearby kingdom. Because of this, Aristotle grew up hearing stories about medicine and how the body works. His father taught him to ask questions like, why do people get sick? And how does the heart pump blood? Even as a little boy, Aristotle loved to think deeply about these things. He was always curious and wanted to know more. When Aristotle turned 17, something amazing happened. He left his hometown and traveled to a big, exciting city called Athens. Athens was like the center of the world back then. It was full of artists, thinkers, and teachers. People from all over came to learn there. In Athens, Aristotle joined a school called the Academy, which was run by a famous teacher named Plato. Plato was one of the greatest philosophers of all time, and Aristotle became his student. Imagine sitting in a classroom with Plato, listening to him talk about big ideas like truth, beauty, and justice. Aristotle stayed at the Academy for 20 years. That's a very long time, longer than most people spend in school today. During those years, he learned so much from Plato, but he also started to have his own thoughts. Sometimes he disagreed with Plato, and that was okay because thinking for yourself is a very important part of being human. After Plato passed away, Aristotle decided to leave Athens and explore the world. He went to different places and met many interesting people. One of the most important things he did was become the teacher of a young boy named Alexander. You might have heard of Alexander. He later became known as Alexander the Great, one of the greatest leaders in history. Aristotle taught Alexander how to think, how to lead people, and how to understand the world. He didn't just teach him facts. He taught him how to be wise. Aristotle was not just a teacher. He was like a guide, helping Alexander grow into a strong and thoughtful leader. Later, Aristotle returned to Athens and started his own school. He called it the Lyceum. The Lyceum was a magical place where people came to learn and study. Aristotle liked to walk around while teaching, so his students followed him as they talked about big ideas. That's why his students were called peripatetics, which means people who walk. At the Lyceum, Aristotle studied almost everything under the sun. He wrote books about animals, plants, stars, governments, and even how to live a happy life. His mind was like a treasure chest full of knowledge, and he wanted to share it with everyone. Now, let me tell you more about what Aristotle studied and why it matters so much. His ideas were so big and deep that they still inspire people today. Here are some of the things he thought about. Logic. Aristotle was the first person to study something called logic. Logic is the way we think and solve problems. For example, if I say, all dogs bark and Max is a dog, then you can use logic to figure out that Max barks. Aristotle created rules for thinking clearly, and these rules are still used today. He called one of his methods a syllogism, which is a fancy word for a kind of argument. A syllogism helps us decide if something is true or false. Aristotle believed that clear thinking is the key to understanding the world, and he wanted everyone to learn how to think well. He spent hours writing about logic, and his ideas helped people make better decisions in their lives. Metaphysics. Aristotle also thought about very big questions like, what is life and why do things exist? These kinds of questions are part of a subject called metaphysics. Aristotle believed that everything has a purpose. For example, the purpose of a tree is to grow and give shade, and the purpose of a bird is to fly. He called this idea the final cause. Aristotle wanted to understand why things happen and what they mean. He spent hours thinking about these questions, and his ideas helped people see the world in new ways. He believed that everything in the universe is connected, and that understanding these connections is the key to wisdom. Ethics. Another thing Aristotle studied was ethics, which is about how to live a good life. He wrote a book called Nicomachean Ethics, which talks about what makes a person good or bad. Aristotle said that being good means finding a balance between two extremes. For example, being brave is good, but being too brave, reckless or not, brave enough, cowardly, is bad. He called this idea the golden mean, which means finding the middle path. Aristotle believed that happiness comes from living a balanced life, and he wanted everyone to learn how to find their own balance. He also said that being good is not just about knowing what is right. It's about doing what is right every day. He encouraged people to practice kindness, honesty, and fairness. Politics. Aristotle also thought about how people should live together in groups. He studied different kinds of governments and wrote about what makes a good leader. He believed that the best government depends on the needs of the people. For example, some places might need a king, while others might need a group of leaders. Aristotle's ideas about politics are still studied today because they help us understand how societies work. He cared deeply about fairness and justice, and he wanted everyone to have a chance to live a good life. He also believed that laws are important because they help keep people safe and happy. Biology. Aristotle loved studying animals and plants. He spent a lot of time watching animals and writing down what he saw. He described hundreds of animals like fish, birds, and insects. He even tried to figure out how animals are born and how they grow. Aristotle's work in biology was very important because he was one of the first people to organize animals into groups based on their features. For example, he grouped animals with feathers together and animals with fur together. He was like a detective, trying to solve the mysteries of nature. He also studied how plants grow and how they help animals survive. Aristotle believed that nature is full of wonder, and he wanted everyone to appreciate it. Physics. Aristotle also studied the natural world, like how things move and change. He wrote about the stars, the earth, and how objects fall to the ground. Some of his ideas about physics were wrong, but that's okay because he was trying to understand the world using the tools he had at the time. For example, he thought that heavy objects fall faster than light objects. Later, scientists proved that this is not always true, but Aristotle's work helped other people learn more about the world. He was like a scientist, always asking questions and looking for answers. He believed that understanding the natural world is important because it helps us live better lives. Rhetoric and poetics. Aristotle also studied how people talk and tell stories. He wrote a book called Rhetoric, which is about how to persuade people. Persuasion means convincing someone to agree with you. Aristotle said that there are 3 ways to persuade someone: by being trustworthy, by using logic, and by appealing to emotions. He also wrote a book called Poetics, which is about storytelling. He talked about tragedies, which are sad stories, and comedies, which are funny stories. His ideas about storytelling are still used in movies and books today. He believed that stories are powerful because they teach us about life and help us understand our feelings. He encouraged writers to create stories that make people think and feel deeply. Aristotle's ideas were so important that they influenced many people after him. After he died in 322 BCE, his writings were kept safe by scholars in the Middle East. Later, during the Middle Ages, his works were brought back to Europe. Many people studied his books, and his ideas shaped how people thought about science, religion, and philosophy. One famous person who was influenced by Aristotle was Thomas Aquinas, a Christian thinker who lived in the 13th century. Thomas Aquinas used Aristotle's ideas to explain Christian beliefs. Even today, Aristotle is remembered as one of the greatest thinkers of all time. His work in logic, ethics, biology, and many other fields continues to inspire people. He was not just a philosopher, he was also a scientist, a teacher, and a writer. He believed in asking questions and looking for answers, and he encouraged others to do the same. There is another side to Aristotle's life that makes him even more interesting. He was not just a thinker, he was also a man of action. For example, when he was teaching Alexander the Great, he didn't just sit in a classroom and lecture. He took Alexander outside, showed him plants and animals, and taught him how to observe the world. Aristotle believed that learning happens not just in books, but also in real life. He encouraged Alexander to travel, explore, and meet new people. He wanted Alexander to understand that the world is full of diversity and beauty. Aristotle also cared deeply about education. He believed that everyone should have the chance to learn, no matter who they are. At the Lyceum, he welcomed students from all backgrounds and taught them how to think for themselves. He believed that knowledge is a gift, and he wanted to share it with as many people as possible. He also believed that learning is a lifelong process. Even after he became famous, Aristotle never stopped studying. He read books, observed nature, and wrote down his thoughts every day. He believed that there is always more to learn, no matter how much you already know. In conclusion, Aristotle was a very special person who lived a long time ago in Greece. He studied many things, like logic, ethics, biology, and politics, and he wrote books that are still read today. He taught Alexander the Great and started his own school called the Lyceum. Aristotle's ideas about the world and how to live a good life have influenced millions of people over thousands of years. If you want to learn more about philosophy, science, or history, Aristotle is a great person to start with. He reminds us that asking questions and thinking carefully are very important skills. Thank you for reading this note. I hope you felt inspired by Aristotle's story. If you practice your English every day, you will become better and better. Just like Aristotle became smarter and smarter by asking questions and studying the world. Keep learning, and never stop asking why.